There's a kind of charm that's very good at filling a room, and not always as good at filling a home. Cary Grant knew that distinction well, though it took him a long time to learn it. On screen, Cary Grant seemed to have it all figured out. He was graceful, witty, warm, someone who made everything look effortless, who seemed completely at ease in any situation, whose presence had a way of making everyone around him feel like the most interesting person in the room. Directors loved working with him. Audiences adored him. He was, by most measures, irresistible company. But off-screen, in private, those who knew him well described someone more complicated. A man who had spent so much of his life performing ease that he sometimes struggled to actually feel it, especially in the closest relationships, the ones that couldn't be managed with charm, the ones that asked for something more sustained and more real. He'd had several marriages that didn't last, and while the reasons were complex, they always are, one thread that runs through his own reflections on those years is this: that he had confused being good company with being truly present. That he had offered charm where presence was what was actually needed. Entertainment when what the other person wanted was simply to be seen. He had a daughter later in life, Jennifer, born when he was in his early 60s, after years of marriages and years of searching for something he couldn't quite name. Those who knew him in those years said that fatherhood changed him in a way that nothing before had. Not immediately, and not because having a child is automatically clarifying, but because a child, unlike an audience, doesn't respond to performance. A child needs something simpler and harder. They need you to show up. Not brilliantly, not charmingly, not ready with the perfect thing to say, just there, consistent, available. Cary Grant, late in his life, spoke about his daughter with a warmth and specificity that stood out from everything else he talked about. Not in a performed way, not with the kind of practiced sentiment that he had been delivering in interviews for decades. With something quieter and less polished than that. Something that, if you watched his face while he spoke, looked a great deal like relief. Like someone who had, finally, found the thing that was actually real. To understand why this shift was so significant for someone like Cary Grant, it helps to know something about where he came from. He was born Archie Leach in Bristol, England, in 1904, into a working-class family with more difficulty in it than he typically spoke about publicly. His mother disappeared from his life when he was a boy, placed in a mental institution without his knowledge. His father told him she had simply gone away. He grew up without fully understanding what had happened, without the steady, quiet presence of a mother who stayed. By most accounts, this early loss shaped him in ways that surfaced again and again in how he moved through relationships. Not consciously, and not because he was careless, but because certain things about intimacy, about trust, about believing that someone would simply stay, never quite settled into ease for him. He learned to be charming, to be engaging, to fill the space between himself and other people with warmth and wit. What he struggled to learn for a long time was how to simply be there without filling anything. By the time he became a father to Jennifer, he had done enough living and enough reflection to understand something of this about himself. That the patterns were old. That they weren't his fault. and that understanding them was, finally, possible, not as a way of excusing anything, but as a way of gently doing better. He once said, in a late interview, that being a father had taught him what he wished he'd understood decades earlier. That the people who love you don't need you to be extraordinary. They need you to be there. Consistently, reliably, without drama, simply there. And that being there, fully, without performance, is harder and more valuable than almost anything else a person can offer. Maybe you felt that too. Maybe there are people in your family, children, grandchildren, a partner, a sibling, who have always had access to the polished version of you. The version that knows what to say, that brings good conversation, that makes family gatherings go smoothly. The one people enjoy being around. And maybe, somewhere underneath that version, there's a quieter one, less polished, less certain, less sure of what to say, that those same people have rarely seen. The one that doesn't have a ready answer. The one that can sit in a quiet room without filling it. The one that, once in a while, would rather just be there than be on. Here's something gentle to consider. That quieter version is often exactly what the people closest to you are waiting for. Not always, but more often than you might think. Children, especially, are remarkably good at sensing the difference between a parent who is present and one who is performing presence. They might not be able to name the difference, but they feel it. Presence is very simple to describe and surprisingly hard to actually do. It means setting down whatever you're managing, whatever you're preparing for next, whatever you're worried about, and giving your full attention to the person in front of you. Not because you have something important to say, just because they're there, and you're there, and that's enough. Cary Grant's films will be enjoyed for as long as people enjoy films. That part of his legacy is settled. But what seemed to matter to him most, in those later conversations about his life, wasn't the films at all. It was the afternoons with his daughter. The ordinary ones, driving her to school, helping with something she needed, sitting beside her at the table. The moments that looked, to anyone watching, like nothing much. But that felt, from the inside, like everything. Maybe it's time to think about the person in your family who needs that kind of presence from you. Not a grand gesture. Not a long conversation with something resolved at the end. Just time. Undivided. Unperformed. Your attention offered simply because you chose to give it, with nothing else in the room. And there's something worth saying here for the people on the other side of this, too. Maybe you've been wanting that presence from someone in your family. A partner who's always distracted. A parent who's always busy. A grown child you rarely have a real conversation with. If so, maybe it's time to say so. Not as a complaint, but as an invitation. Something simple and honest. I don't need you to have anything figured out. I just want to spend some time with you. Really with you, with nothing else going on. Most people, when they receive an invitation like that from someone they love, want to say yes. They just didn't know it was being asked. Cary Grant spent most of his career being effortlessly, brilliantly on for the world. And at the end of it, the thing he was most grateful for was a relationship that asked him to be nothing of the sort. Just a father, showing up day after day without any need to be remarkable. Just present. Just there. If you're watching this tonight, maybe there's someone in your family who just needs you to show up this week. Not brilliantly, not with anything prepared. Just there. There's one more thing worth sitting with here. Maybe you find yourself thinking, as you listen to this, of your own parents or grandparents, and wondering whether they were truly present with you the way you would have wanted. Maybe there were people who loved you who didn't quite know how to show up in the way you needed. Charming in the world, but somewhere distant at home. Good with words, but not always with stillness. If that's familiar, maybe there's some comfort in knowing that many people, even remarkable, caring people, struggle with this, for reasons that have very little to do with how much they love you. The patterns are often old, older than them sometimes, inherited the way so many things are, from their own childhoods, which also had their own silences and absences and unspoken needs. That doesn't remove the ache of it if it's there, but it might soften it slightly. And it might make it a little easier to let go of the idea that their distance meant they didn't love you. Because almost always, it didn't mean that at all. Cary Grant spent decades not quite understanding why intimacy felt the way it did for him. And then, gently, through the particular clarity of becoming a father late in life, something shifted. Not because he fixed anything, not because the past changed, but because he finally stopped being so busy performing that he could feel, for the first time, what was actually there. That shift is available to anyone, at any age, no matter how long the other patterns have been running. It usually starts very small, one moment where you set down the performance, just for a little while, and simply sit with the person in front of you. If you're watching this tonight, maybe there's someone in your family who just needs you to show up this week. Not brilliantly, not with anything prepared, just there. So take a slow breath. And maybe, this week, offer one person in your family the simplest and most valuable thing you have to give. Your presence, unperformed and fully theirs.